time for The Verdict. The Verdict is a lively discussion of current events and legal issues pertinent to Oklahomans. The Verdict is hosted by Kent Meyers. It's time for The Verdict.
And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Kent Meyers. We're really pleased that you've joined us again this Sunday morning to talk about the second part of a series we have on health issues that we're doing for you on The Verdict. Last week, you may recall, we had Dr. Mike Crutcher, the Commissioner of Health for the state of Oklahoma, on talking about some public health issues. This Sunday, we're going to bring it a little more in close and personal to many of you, because we're going to be talking about what is truly an under-publicized health crisis among our children. Our children are, by and large, or many, are overweight. They eat the wrong food, and they don't get enough exercise. Today we're going to be talking about talking with two people about this problem. They are affiliated with the Fit Kids Coalition, Stanley Hupfeld and Ann Roberts. Stick with us. We'll be right back on The Verdict. And welcome back. Kent Meyers on The Verdict this Sunday, and we're really pleased today to have two guests join us to talk about the Fit Kids Coalition that's been formed in Oklahoma and is going to be seeking legislation from the Oklahoma legislature this year. Across the table from me is Ann Roberts. Ann is the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Institute for Child Advocacy and has been since 1989. She's an honors graduate from the University of Oklahoma in vocal music and also has her master's degree. She was selected as the National Child Advocate of the Year by the National Association of Child Advocates, a very fine honor in this area. And she's a legislative committee chair for the Oklahoma Fit Kids Coalition. Ann, this is your first visit, but I hope not your last. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We're pleased to have you. Across the table from me on my right is Stanley Hupfeld. Stanley is a native Texan, but has been an Oklahoman since 1987. He's the president and chief executive officer of INTEGRIS Health here in Oklahoma, which encompasses 16 hospitals all in Oklahoma. His undergraduate degree was from the University of Texas, where he was a participant in the 1963 National Championship football team for the University of Texas, but we have forgiven him for that. He obtained his master's degree from Trinity University in health administration. He's been the chairman of the board of both the United Way in Oklahoma and the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce, and he's the chair of the Fit Kids Coalition. Once again, his first visit, but I hope not the last. Stan, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you.
Yeah.
And let me start with you. What is the health problem our children are facing?
Well, I'm just appalled to say that the Centers for Disease Control has reported that since 1970, the rates of obesity in children has doubled, and the rates of obesity in teenagers has tripled. So we're seeing all across the nation a huge problem with kids, and it's gone way past just a cosmetic type of issue. Kids are suffering from tremendous health problems because of this.
Some of the materials I looked at prior to this show indicates that Oklahoma is near the top of the list with this kind of an obesity problem among our youngsters. Why do you think Oklahoma is near the top?
I know that you had Dr. Crutcher on last week. He probably told you that of all the states in the nation, Oklahoma is the only one whose health conditions actually got worse over the last 10 years. And that's directly attributable to obesity, which is caused by sedentary lifestyles and bad eating habits. And then tobacco use is the other risk factor that's just really off the charts in Oklahoma.
Well, I'll end up asking you both this question, but I'm still curious, why do we think Oklahoma is so much worse off than many other states? What about our lifestyle, what about our environment, our training, whatever it may be, makes us near the top of the list?
It's probably, again, right along with the rest of the nation, the sedentary lifestyles with kids no longer having access to recess in many cases. I'm sure you know that a lot of schools, in their attempts to make sure that academics are the most important thing and the test scores are going up, but then the consequence is kids spending more time sitting down and not being outside and playing kickball and doing all those kinds of things. And then the eating habits, the CDC again reported that 40% of the meals eaten by families are takeout or fast food meals.
Stan, we know that if a child is overweight it can cause problems, but be a little more specific, if you will. What kind of physical problems are we seeing now in children that we didn't used to?
Well, it's really very interesting, and I personally became alarmed when our pediatricians and our pediatric endocrinologist told us that for the first time in their careers, they were seeing preteens and teenagers having adult onset diabetes. It's interesting, if you looked in the medical text, it was not even thought to be a possibility 20 years ago. And so all of a sudden this is appearing in this group of individuals. In addition to that, they're seeing teenagers with signs of heart disease, with certain kinds of liver cancer, sleep apnea. And so what we're about to do in this nation, and particularly in this state, is to graduate a whole cohort of individuals from their teenage years into their 20s now with chronic diseases. Now, the important thing to recognize is that the total health care bill in this country is 75% due to chronic diseases. So now all of a sudden, if we have people with chronic diseases in their 20s, not in their 40s, not in their 50s, not in their 60s, the exponential cost of that is extremely alarming.
I noticed in something that you had written in an article in a newspaper, you referred to facing this problem with a polite yawn of indifference. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Well, it is interesting, and we said this when we had the press conference to introduce our legislation, that if we had a raging disease, a raging virus, we as a population would be storming the state capitol demanding a solution. Just look at relatively few cases of SARS in China, or a few cows in Montana, and how upset we get. But yet here we have a third of our population that's developing these diseases, and we're not quite focused on it yet. And frankly, that's part of what we're trying to do beside legislation, is to raise the level of public debate, and by so doing, raise the level of public outrage.
Well, we hope we can, through this show, raise the level of public debate. And let me ask you about, in about 30 seconds, tell us what's going on in physical education in the schools that you're not satisfied with.
Well, again, a lot of the schools have had to cut back on physical education to make room for the academic courses. And actually, schools have been very creative in this way to provide pathways for kids to walk on and that sort of thing. Some schools are really stepping up to the plate. We want to make sure all schools and all school children have those same opportunities.
Let's take a break. We'll come back. We're visiting with Ann Roberts and Stan Hupfeld from the Oklahoma Fit Kids Coalition. You're joining us on The Verdict, and we're glad. We'll see you in just a minute. Welcome back to The Verdict. I'm Kent Myers, and today we're visiting with Ann Roberts and Stanley Hupfeld, both here representing the Oklahoma Fit Kids Coalition. We've been talking about what has been described as truly a health crisis among our littlest citizens, and what these two fine people are trying to do about it through the Fit Kids Coalition. Not on their own, they have a lot of help, but they're making efforts here. And before we finished discussing what's going on in schools. One thing we didn't talk about in the last segment was fast food vending. What kind of circumstances are you finding with fast food vending in our schools?
Well, of course, there is a cafeteria line in each school that has to come up to USDA standards. But alongside that are vending machines that kids can access unhealthy foods. We have, soft drinks and very high caloric salt and sugar items. And we have found that kids are, of course, using their dollars to buy things out of the vending machines, a very unhealthy diet, rather than going through the cafeteria line. It's a real problem.
How is the pricing in the vending machines making the problem worse?
Well, unfortunately, you can buy a soda pop for maybe 50 or 75 cents, whereas water or fruit juice can cost $1 or more. So obviously the kids are going to get the biggest bang for their buck and buy something cheaper, which is the unhealthy choice.
Well, faced with that, I know you two are involved with what we have called the Fit Kids Coalition. Stanley, tell us, what is the Fit Kids Coalition, and generally who belongs to the coalition?
Well, it is a group of people, like Ann and myself and our organizations, that really began to focus on the problem. And it includes all the major health providers, health organizations that you would assume, people like the Lung Association, the Heart Association. Certainly we have representation from the State Health Department and the State Education Department. The Medical Association is involved. So it's a really broad-based group, about 40 organizations.
And I think the governor put his stamp of approval on it.
We had a very fine press conference, and the governor kicked it off, and he's been very helpful as we move this legislation forward.
What's the mission of the Fit Kids Coalition? What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, two things. Obviously, the fact that we've introduced legislation in and of itself will spark public debate. And we want to do two things. First off is just accentuate this problem, focus on it, get our families and our school authorities to realize what the extent of the problem is. And then secondly, by so doing, hopefully have some legislation that is helpful. And our position is that our kids, by peer pressure, by advertising, face an awful lot of emphasis to do the wrong thing. And our schools should not be party in aiding that. So we want to encourage them to do the right thing. When we do that, we'll also encourage local school boards to do the right thing. So it is an effort to try to raise public awareness and to help people do the kinds of things which ultimately will benefit our children.
And you're the legislative chair for the Fit Kids Coalition, and I know there is legislation now pending. The Fit Kids Act of 2004 has been introduced in the legislature. Tell our viewers generally what that will do.
Well, there's actually 3 bills that comprise our Fit Kids legislation. One concerns vending machines that we talked about before, which is to replace unhealthy items in the vending machines with healthier items and use incentive pricing so that the healthy choices are less expensive than the unhealthy choices. The second bill is about PE in school, physical education, to provide an opportunity for the State Board of Education to provide some programs in the schools to return PE to the schools. Then the last one, which may be the most important, is to get parents and community members involved in what we're calling local safe and healthy schools committees to study the problem in their own school site and make recommendations to their school board.
Well, the thing, Kent, I want to make sure that we, the schools are in very difficult positions, and we understand that. The school boards and the superintendents and the administrators are faced with a very difficult choice because of restrictions in state funding. The vending machine money that they receive has become very attractive to them. It funds the band, it funds girls' debate, it funds soccer teams, all those kinds of extras that we expect from our schools. The problem is that they have become, in some instances, wed to that money. We think that if we encourage them by legislation, local action, to make choices, make good choices, in effect, we will not damage their revenue streams. If you give a child a choice between an unhealthy sugary item and a healthy item, they'll always pick the sugary item. If you don't give them a choice, they will adjust very, very quickly. And so in communities and in states that have made these kinds of moves already, what we find is that the schools can have both. It can be a win-win. They can have their vending machines, healthy items, and still keep their revenues to do the kind of things they need.
Well, And what kind of reception have you received so far in the legislature?
Well, it's been mixed because I think at the very onset, school superintendents were concerned, as Mr. Hupfeld said, about the loss of revenue if we banned vending machines. And it was never our intention to ban them. We simply want to replace those items, the unhealthy with the healthy. But I'm pleased to say that just yesterday, on Monday, we were able to pass all 3 pieces of our legislation through the first committee, and now they're headed for the Senate floor.
So it's moving forward.
It's moving forward.
And the prospects are bright, I hope.
I think so.
Well, Stan, what can people do to try to help?
Well, certainly they can focus on our website. We encourage them to do so.
Yeah, let's talk about that. The website is www.integrislifespan.com, which we're showing up there now.
Right.
And then
the second thing they can do is, you know, it is amazing to me, the more that I get involved in the legislative process, that the voice of the people does matter.
Absolutely.
And if our legislators hear from concerned parents that, yes, we want something done, it makes our job so much easier. If all they hear from are folks that just kind of want to keep the status quo, then they're inclined to do so. But with a strong public outcry, this sense of outrage that I talked about, we can make a real difference.
Well, you two can certainly, and your coalition I'm sure will. We've been pleased today to have Ann Roberts and Stan Hupfeld here with the Oklahoma Fit Kids Coalition. Go on the website, do your part. Our kids are worth it. We'll see you in just a second. And welcome back. We were pleased today to have Ann Roberts and Stan Hupfeld on talking about the Oklahoma Fit Kids Coalition, and now we're going to change pace a little bit. An organization with which I'm involved, the Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, has been a sponsor of the verdict for every show we've had in this last 3 years. And today we're pleased to have a little segment that will deal with Oklahoma Lawyers for Children. Across the table on my right is Don Nicholson, the president and co-founder of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children. Don is joining us today to discuss a little bit about Lawyers for Children. Across the table on my left is my brother, Stuart Meyers. Stuart is a president of the Meyers Life Agency, a life insurance agency here in Oklahoma City, and is a member of the $1 Million Roundtable, a national organization, in fact, the premier life insurance organization in the country. And he's here because of a presentation that the $1 Million Roundtable wants to make to Oklahoma Lawyers for Children. Don and Stuart, really glad that you could join us.
Thank you, Kent.
Stuart, why don't you go ahead with the presentation?
Thank you, Kent. Don, I'm very pleased to represent the $1 Million Roundtable. There are some 28,000 members of the $1 Million Roundtable internationally, which is an example of 0.5% of all of the life insurance agents in the United States and internationally, representing more than 60 countries. They have a foundation called the $1 Million Roundtable Foundation, which each year, and has since 1959, given away dollars to charities that they felt really served the purpose for which the foundation was established. I'm very pleased that the Oklahoma Lawyers for Children this year is going to receive, and has received, the okay to get a grant from the foundation, and it's a pleasure for me today to give you this grant for the work that you have done. The $1 Million Roundtable will give away over $900,000 this year to those charities which qualify, so it's just a pleasure for me to include Oklahoma Lawyers for Children.
Well, on behalf of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, our sincere thank you for this contribution. I want the thanks to come from our volunteers, and as regards our volunteers, I might tell you just a little bit about them. We have over 350 lawyers from Oklahoma County who are volunteering their time and their resources to help represent the deprived and abused, neglected children of Oklahoma County, of which there are far too many, I might add. In addition to the lawyers, we have over 150 non-lawyers, citizens of Oklahoma County, who are also donating their time to help these children. Half of these volunteers are trained to make visits at the Pauline Meyer shelter when children are first taken from their families and placed in custody of the state. Those volunteers comfort those children on that first morning in the shelter and try and find relatives with which they can be placed. The other approximately 75 volunteers are trained to do what I call home studies, so that these children, that homes of aunts, uncles, and grandparents can be inspected and reviewed, so that a report can be made that assures the court that if they're placed with a relative, they'll be safe. This is the job that Oklahoma Lawyers for Children is trying to do. I might add that in the representation of the children, we're doing that in assistance of the Public Defender's Office.
Well, but I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. We're out of time. Don, thank you for coming. Stuart, thank you so much for making this presentation. Thanks to the members of the $1 Million Roundtable and to our viewers on The Verdict. We'll see you next week.